This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Slitska. I'm your host, and on this episode, we are joined by Lucy Lewin, who is the founder and CEO of Little Angels in Uppingham. Thank you, Lucy, for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Well, today we are talking about Ofsted and specifically about inspections. So you're here, Lucy, to share your voice around your recent experience with Ofsted, which you write in your article has unfortunately shattered the trust you had for Ofsted, leaving you questioning the efficacy and fairness of the current system. And I said unfortunately, now I'm thinking, or maybe, obviously unfortunately, because it's been very difficult, but actually you're here to talk about how things can change rather than kind of wallowing in all of it. And I'm sure you'll tell us more about that. So what has made you lose your trust is that big question.
Yeah, that is the hugest question, isn't it? I think we have been established since 2010. We have gone through a number of different style of inspections during that time. So 2010, 2015, 2018, and then March 2024. I think we were, I'm going to use the word victim, and I don't like to use that because I don't want pity or anything from anybody, but I do feel that we were victims of what I'm going to call a black swan, okay? Not actually a big black swan. No animals were harmed in the in our Ofsted inspections, but what I mean by that is just one of those complete anomalies, just a situation where despite all of our systems, our processes, our training, I also likened it to that, the Lemony Snicket's catalogue of unfortunate events. And I think for me, not necessarily the inspection day on itself ruined my trust. That shook it. I think it was what happened afterwards. It was the inconsistency, I think, in the complaints process. Because my inspection was on the 12th of March, that meant despite there being a lot of media noise around the new complaints process, inspection was before that. So I was still complaining under an old system. So that's confusing for me. It must have been confusing for all of the people that doing it. How can you run two complaint processes at the same time? I also just felt that I am the sort of person where I've built a culture within my organisation, within my own family, within my children, to be accountable, right? I truly believe that we can learn a lot in the mistakes that we make if we sit in that uncomfortableness of accountability, ownership and responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I said I didn't really like using the victim word, because for me, that tends to sit in that kind of blame and denial space. Not saying victims of are those things. I'm just saying if that's a mindset. And I think what was really soul destroying and heartbreaking for me was watching a system that I held in such high regard, right? My name's Lucy Lewin. I'm the owner of a setting, and I so desperately want to be outstanding. I want to be outstanding because I truly believe that children deserve to be within educational settings that are striving for at least the very best that they can be. Do I think my team are there? At the moment, yeah, maybe just. 2 years ago, 100%, then natural progression, maternity leaves, people moving on. We are ebbing and flowing with those kind of career pathways. But I genuinely now have seen a side to our inspectorate that is flawed in human judgment. It has no accountability. It is hugely biased in the way its sole purpose is to kind of uphold the integrity of the entire system, rather than hold itself accountable to maybe error, maybe misunderstandings, maybe things not necessarily being black and white. Because we know that, don't we? There are so many nuances, there are so many different factors at play in your average early year setting, that how can we bring it down to just one word and one day? And, you know, by the very nature of the fact that 6 years worth of work needs to be shown on a day when emotions are heightened because everybody wants to do a really good job, but because our emotions are heightened, those wonderful little beings that we've dedicated our life to looking after and educating are picking up on, you know, Lucy feels a bit prickly today. So is it any wonder that on top of the stress of inspection, children are picking up on this discombobulated feeling in the people that they care for? So often the day doesn't run smoothly. You can't be at your best when you've also, your best means what? You know, I've always said to my team, I don't want you to do anything different on inspection day. Oh, the power of hindsight. I don't want them to. Don't, actually, I'm going to stand by that. I don't do anything specifically for Ofsted. When you come and inspect us, HMI, you are seeing what you will see every single day. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try and showcase what we do, but where in the inspection process, yes, there's a learning walk to show off what you do. Yes, there's a leadership and management meeting to talk about it. But actually, if you are only coming once every 6 years, which is arguably 2 life cycles of the average person that attends your setting, how are we able, as the educators, to really share a full journey? You're just getting such a small snapshot of the day. And I also think the bit that's broken my heart the most is I genuinely believed Ofsted were the custodians of quality, that they really did want to raise standards in education. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think if they truly wanted to raise standards in education, they wouldn't be so dictatory, so rigid, and so stuck in that belief that their system is fail-proof. Because that's fundamentally what's happened. The system has failed me, the system has failed my families, and there is nothing, not even through the whole complaints procedure, to the independent adjudicator. I think somebody at the top level needs to Google what independent adjudicator means, and especially more emphasis on the word independent. I'm not so sure you can share a building with somebody and call them independent. But yeah, I think if my life over the last 26 weeks was a movie, I think I would be walking around with a big cloud around me and that word inadequate punching away at me in every single moment. And I think just the word, Angelica, inadequate, like I'm quite a fan of language and the power that it has. Okay.
Yeah.
Inadequate is absolutely horrible. You know, to sit there and say to my team, who turn up day in, day out, that reflect, that go above and beyond, that we have been judged inadequate based on what can only be described as a black swan style event, you know, one of those really unforeseen, unexpected, completely out of the blue situations, is, I don't know, I'm going to go as far as say it was one of the hardest things I've had to do. And my life has been full of emotional turmoil, but this felt so unfair, kind of personal. You know, I am the Ofsted nominated person. My nursery has been my absolute life's work for the last nearly 15 years. I've dedicated my health, my well-being, and my absolutely everything to that, because I genuinely believe in what I'm striving to create for my community, the children, the families, and the people that work for me. So to have a person come in and spend time with us and be really kind and friendly, and it all goes seemingly well until kind of something that doesn't even make sense happen, for them to then leave us by saying, you are inadequate. Just, I don't know, it feels so personal and so unfair and almost unjust. And I don't even think it's not the process necessarily at that moment. You know, Ofsted talk so openly through their big listen and all the kind of narrative they've tried to put out there around putting well-being at the epicenter of their systems and processes. Well, I can say, as a user of their systems and processes, that is a memo that went out, and that has not created any form of systemic change within Ofsted. And I truly believe if we want to continue and have a system where it's purposeful, where we can work together collaboratively with an arbitrator of quality, the parents, educators, and the child, then so much needs to change. Yeah. And I think it needs to start with the culture. You know, it does feel like Amanda Spillman spoke when she was HMI about Ofsted not being there for improvement. That wasn't their remit, okay? They were there to make judgments based on an inspection framework. Yeah. Well, if that's the case, then why does the word improvement feature so many times within their own inspection framework?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, does it?
And also, you've given me these recommendations. Now what? Where do I go? If I truly believed that I was outstanding and you're telling me I'm inadequate, I'd like to point out 2 areas were inadequate, 2 were still good. So learning and development and behaviours and attitudes of the children were still graded at good in my March inspection. If that's the case, where is my support? Where do I go to question against what they saw and what they judged? It's not in the complaints process. It's not in the factual accuracy check. And in fact, you know, that leads me quite nicely to say, let's talk about my lived experience of the complaint process. The system protected itself. So there were misinterpretations of factual events made during that complaints process that skewed or maybe were done purposefully to protect the system's integrity. And actually, I was there on the day, the initial inspector was there on the day, but a separate independent complaints inspector is making, assumptions, I think, based on a written piece of evidence. There was no mediation in that process. Surely a more fairer way of handling complaints when they get to a certain stage. Let's hope that some can be dealt with at stage 1, some even at stage 2. So we are filtering down to not huge numbers, but at the very least, that's got to be a round table discussion between the Ofsted nominated individual, the inspector that was there on the day, the complaints handler, and maybe an independent person. Because all they were doing is checking that the system had been followed. It didn't matter if somebody misinterpreted some data or even fabricated some truths to justify a judgment that had been made. None of that mattered. And I think for me, that's where the unfairness sits. That's where, for me, that flawed inspection framework really needs to change, because it's failing everybody.
Hi, it's Angelica here. Thank you all for listening in. I'm here to ask for a quick favour from the early years community. In order for the Voice of Early Childhood to continue creating free, valuable content and sharing voices, we need your help. Please hit the subscribe button wherever you are listening on. And if you are listening on a podcast platform, then check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can not only listen, but also watch the podcast and really focus in on the discussions. Or if you are viewing on YouTube already, remember that you can also find us on 19 different podcast platforms. Simply search for The Voice of Early Childhood and subscribe to get a brand new episode every Monday morning, ready for your morning commute or however you start your week. And as always, do share the podcast with colleagues, friends, and parents of young children. We have a lot of interested parents and family members listening in and reading the articles. So let's ensure more of them can access the free content. Let's encourage them to engage and keep these thought-provoking discussions going. Enjoy the rest of the episode. And you write about that in your article as well, that there's that need to reduce inspector bias, and you also talk about inspector training as well, and the fact that the judgments should be calibrated across different regions to ensure that consistency. So yeah, there's a lot there, and like you say, it's of course the well-being element should be addressed, and we should question whether Ofsted learn, or I guess put into place quickly enough, anything from the case of Ruth Perry, the head teacher that took her own life after about 2 months. Ofsted told her that they were downgrading her school from outstanding to inadequate. So there's all of that to question, and all these things that you're saying, listening to you, it really is such a much more bigger thing to address. It's systemic rather than individual inspectors, rather than is it the case of single word judgments. There's so many things there, but we can't just change that focus on well-being. Like you said, that clearly hasn't really worked. We can't just change the way that the inspections process works, certain elements, or just the judgments, the one-word judgments. It can't be those things in isolation, that's what it seems to be happening. It needs to be a whole relook of the system, like you say, a culture change. Yeah.
And I think that's it for me. I think if we are going to get this right for the children, and then in turn, the educators, the leaders and managers, the communities, the wider kind of world, then this has to start with really going back to what is the purpose of having an arbitrator of quality if a judgment is made and that is the end of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Where else in any learning world or journey, let's call it, does it end with, I don't think you're good enough, full stop? Because
that's
that's what an Ofsted inspection is, isn't it?
Mm.
Yes, they may triangulate their evidence. Yes, they might follow their own policies to say that I gathered 3 pieces of evidence to make that assumption. But fundamentally, it comes down to, like we've said, flaws in human judgment. Where is the framework that gets inspectors to check their own biases?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do I know that the inspector on that day back in March hadn't had a particularly awful morning? Maybe she got stuck in traffic. She didn't get to my setting till 9:20. We open at 7:30. I always believed that they got there, 7:30, 8 o'clock time. So where do we have in the system continuity for checking in on those biases? I read a book recently called Noise, and that was on about the flaws in human judgment. And it resonated so much with me because it got me really thinking about, there is no mechanism within the framework to check in on inspectors' own biases. Yes, they have to own or kind of say about conflicts of interest, so you can't inspect somebody setting. But how do you know what was really fascinating in the most recent one, 28th of August inspection, so my re-inspection? We were picked up on the fact that educators missed opportunities to extend children's learning. Okay, so apparently there was a situation out in the garden where there was lots of things going on, but two of my one unqualified educator, one apprentice educator, was sat with a group of children. And they were very much present with the children, but just almost letting the children be. Julie Fisher's interacting or interfering, right? It's something that sits deep within our pedagogy. I always say to my team, don't throw a log on children's learning, let them be, right? I don't believe that a successful way of teaching is throwing lots of questions at children and expecting them to answer them.
Yeah.
I believe that a good quality teacher notices those teachable moments and acts accordingly. Now, I asked the team to reflect on whether they felt that they missed an opportunity to teach. Bearing in mind, I'm asking an unqualified educator who's only 4 weeks into her role with me and an apprentice who is 6 months in with me, if they thought they'd missed an opportunity, and neither of them said yes. Yet in the most recent inspection, that's one of our recommendations, right? Now, how do I know, or where is it captured about the inspector's understanding of a slow pedagogy, the art of presence, not interfering, rather choosing to interact when sensitive and necessary, letting children play? How do I know? She told me more than once that she'd been an inspector for 27 years. So how do I know that her credentials are up to date and modern? How do I know that she's not an old, historic, I don't know, and I'm, and I really shouldn't speak ill of her, because I actually don't know what her credentials are, because that's one thing we don't know, do we? These people that turn up to judge me, we don't know their story, we don't know their history.
And we don't know how much training they have done, or when was the most recent bit of training, and was it early year specific, and who was it, who did they go to?
I find it really interesting. I've got I love true Montessori settings. I have a lot of kind of professional respect for them. Yet they have a very different delivery style model to what I'm trying to build. My business's values are to be fun, flexible, and full of love. And I think that is ever present in everything that we deliver, right? And that is why parents in my community choose me, because they buy into our curriculum, our pedagogy, and our values. How do I know that those values align with the inspectors? The inspector may have a very different view of what education looks like. They might want to see more adult-led activities being delivered. They may want to see something that's very different. How are we accounting for those biases within a system that visits once every 6-year cycle, when the average tenure of His Majesty's inspector is less than 2.5 years, and that there is no kind of what's next from the judgment? And I think that is really important.
Because they've only got a few hours to really understand your settings, ethos, values, approach, pedagogy. And it is that one-off, one day. So what did you say, 6 years ago you got inspected or so?
Yep, so 2018.
So 2018 to 2024. And those 6 years, because you got that inadequate because of that particular, like you said, black swan situation, now it's kind of saying those 6 years you are judged as inadequate, only from one day, a few hours. So that really brings us on to what you recommend in your article, what needs to change. One of the things you're saying is more frequent light touch evaluations. And I'm assuming you're using the word evaluations here rather than inspections or judgments, because those words in themselves, as you say, language is important, are not useful. So that's to build a more accurate picture of the setting's performance over time, rather than a one-off inspection and you get that judgment all from a couple of hours. So you see it as, more frequent and light touch evaluation. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that and how you envisage that working, I guess?
Yeah, I think, again, language matters. So where I started with that is like, right, I see it at the moment, the inspection framework, the judgment process is a real siloed approach to recommendation or talking about who we are and how we present as educational institutions and settings. And actually what I wanted to create was that real kind of symbiosis around how do we co-create really good quality education, because as part of another role and another life that I have alongside my setting, I do support setting. So I have been in settings that are really in need of support. Okay, so I have been into those buildings where I have been worried about whether or not these adults can keep these children safe, let alone give them any kind of education. All right, so I'm not adverse. I don't think we need to abolish Ofsted. All right, even after what I've been through, but we definitely need to create change. I think when I'm talking about the history of education, I'll always think we need to move up and update our times. Okay, I think the approach to inspection needs to shift from, like you said, isolated bureaucratic evaluations to integrated, supported, and learner focused. We talk about outcomes for children. Where in that framework does the voice of the child come out? How many parents understand what reading, right? I have 15 years experience and a first class honours degree in education studies. And clearly I don't know what it means if I can't understand it. So how's a parent of now a 9-month-old baby who, you know, of a working parent is now entitled to 30 hours of childcare in a good setting? What is that actually looking like? So what would I do? I think we need to align those systems together, all right? I think Ofsted needs to redefine its role to really help us define, design, and deliver a real transformative education culture. This is not just an Ofsted problem. I think this is a culture of our education here in Western society. I think they need to collaborate with educators, not put on a big listen that they've already got the answers for, because in March, the inspector that sat in my setting told me that they were doing away with single word judgments. And I said, well, that doesn't help me now, does it? Back in March. Well, hold on. Since March, we've had a new Labour government come in, and then we've had, apparently as a response to a new Labour government, the removal of single word judgments in schools, but with no word of it happening in early years yet. But in March, she told me they're doing away with it. Fascinating. I think we've got to go back to learner-centric ecosystem. We have to start with the child. We have to then think the quality of the education that the educators receive directly impacts the quality of the education the child gets. So if the child's at the centre, what does that ecosystem around them look like? Well, it looks like highly skilled or people on a learning journey to get those skills. But everyone's got to be well, right? We've got to have high levels of well-being here. We've got to feel psychologically safe, right? Right now, with Ofsted around, this is what they've done to my setting. They've taken a really good group of people who are led by, well, 100% of my setting are on vocational training. We've got 5 people with either a foundation degree or a BA. We've got an early years teacher. We lead with a real continuous professional development culture, right? So, but we've still got something wrong. Now, for us to sit there with that kind of level of commitment to our careers, we need to make sure that that's being remarked. I would love to see a shift from this real transactional inspection framework where we're just looking on measurable outcomes, right? Especially in the national curriculum. But, you know, it is transactional, isn't it? Inspector comes, they make a judgment, off they jog. Imagine if we could turn that to transformational. And there are lots of different kind of structures, there's the 4 T's. So there's a framework that looks to transact, transition, transform, and transcend. And that as a quality improvement model, imagine what that could do to our education system, right? We are not just talking about coming in, making a judgment and leaving. We're making a commitment to the quality as an ongoing process. It's cultivating growth, collaboration, creativity. It's not having one size fits all. It's about really ensuring that we open up to all of the things that we do well. We ask confidently and without fear for support in areas where we need support, but also working towards those kind of better outcomes for children. I think we need to realign everything. Yeah. And that's what I mean by symbiosis. I think what I want to do is get everybody back on the same page. I don't believe there are many Ofsted inspectors out there as humans that don't buy into what they believe they're doing, raising standards in education. I would like to think that most nursery managers also strive for the same. I don't think you dedicate your life to early childhood and care and also then don't want to do a really good job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
Why have we got this real top-down one-time inspection process? That doesn't foster continuous improvement. It does not move us out of siloed thinking to joined up working. We've got so many stakeholders in the education system, and I often think, do they compete against each other? You know, is Ofsted's purpose blurred with that of the Department for Education? Whose role is what? One is the inspectorate, one is the policy making department. How do they fit together then? And actually, how do we make Ofsted a force for good? How do we create that culture of growth rather than fear? Well, what I want to really get to is a place where educators feel enabled to deliver the best outcomes for children without that real fear of what happens if I get this wrong? Because that's where we are at the moment. I've now got a team of people who I have had to love, nurture and support through the last 26 weeks, who have gone from being really good to now questioning every little thing that they do. They have genuinely, this process has taken good, outstanding educators and made them fearful. That's not what an arbitrator of quality should be doing. The custodian of quality should not be terrifying people, humans, almost into paralysis. Because they're now so scared to do something that kind of overwhelming fear has paralysed them in their actions. And I think that was actually quite evident in our re-inspection. You know, I watched a team of confident, articulate, knowledgeable people crumble. And more than one of them in the staff room sobbing on that day of the re-inspection because the pressure was so intense. You know, for me, it's that literally like a ton weight. And I think something I would like to talk about, Angelica, and I don't know if we're kind of going off on the side here, but where do you go as the leader in this current siloed system for support? Because I can't turn down to my team because they're looking up to me for leadership during this crisis, because that's what it was. It was a crisis, right? And they're looking up to me for hope, for stability, for me to shine that light at the end of the tunnel. And actually, I'll do that for them because I'm their employer. They give so much to me, and that's my one job.
And you have to be there, don't you?
Yeah. Where do I go?
That is your role.
Where do the leaders and managers go after getting that inadequate judgment? Oh, forgive me, under the new complaints process, I can make one phone call to Ofsted, but after that I can't. Everything's email. But how do you get them to feel that your thoughts and validations have been justified? And bearing in mind, let's just go back to the process as it stands at the moment. So you've had inspectors in your building, irrespective of how it's been going, for what, 4 or 5 hours, maybe, by the time they come and ask you to do the leadership and management meeting. Like we kind of jossed about earlier, but that's not recorded in any way other than the notes that you take. And actually, I wanted to be present with the inspector. I was exhausted in March after that initial inspection. I was even more exhausted on the inspection of the 28th of August on the basis that I'd just driven 175 miles from being at my daughter's bedside. So on the day inspection, I was actually in Newcastle because my daughter had just had surgery the day before. And when they turned up unannounced, my manager called me to say that they were at the door. And I asked the inspector on the phone if we could pause the inspection so that I could at least get my daughter home, back from Newcastle, back to the Midlands where I am. And that's a 3.5 hour journey down the A1. So it's a long, laborious road that is just straight for, 100 and whatever it is miles. So it's a hard road at the best of time, let alone when your daughter's just had major surgery.
Yeah.
But they told me that did the threshold to pause the inspection. So I'm now coming home. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that leadership and management meeting is not the opportunity, like they think it is, for leaders and managers to discuss the outcome. They tell you what they found. If you've got the energy, the tenacity, or the confidence to speak up in that meeting because you've not been exhausted through the process, or because you've not just driven for 4 hours to get to the inspection, then great, you've got a real opportunity there to have good dialogue with the inspector. Most people, though, by that point, just want them off their premises. Yeah. I have to say, that's been my experience in all of my other inspections. So that not just my inadequate one, all of those leadership and management meetings happening at the end of inspection day are not the time to be doing that. It's almost like you need the inspector to go away. You go to your team, get the judgment, yes, but have that meeting the next morning or something, because when do you process it all?
Yeah.
What we know about how the human brain works is we know possibly, almost probably, all of us as leader and managers, if not the entire team, are in fight or flight throughout the duration of that inspection, right? We know that then that's not giving us the ability to use our brain in its entirety. We are literally primed for action. We are fight, fright, freeze. So how am I listening to hear? How am I in a space where I can absorb all of this information that's being said to me? And bearing in mind, all I get is that report that is now in the public domain. That is a complete overview of absolutely everything that happened that day. How much more useful would it be if that was recorded? So you get a recording of the feedback. That leads nicely into me thinking about the complaints process. I requested copies of all of the notes. There'd been some inaccuracies, we'll call them, to be polite, around what was done and said on the day back in March. So I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask for copies of the inspection notes so I can actually try and understand where these inaccuracies have come from. All right, because at least if I could read what was written in that report, I could get some understanding of perhaps where the complaints inspector had got the information from. After 17 emails backwards and forwards of them saying, no, I couldn't do a subject access request. No, I couldn't. Did you know this? That Ofsted's inspection notes and minutes sit outside the Freedom of Information Act? So we have no ability to be able to gain that information under the IFO or under a subject access request. So apparently it's sensitive information that would give other people an advantage during the inspection process, so they can't give you it. Right, they were eventually able to send me some heavily redacted copies of the original meeting notes. Why are they heavily redacting the minutes of the leadership and management meeting and the inspection that I was present at? Who are they redacting that information from? I was there. So I had a bird's eye view of what was going on in my setting. Why have they redacted it? It's one of those questions that if you're asking me, can I get over it? No, these are those questions that I need answers to.
Yeah.
What is so sensitive in those meeting notes, the meeting in which I was present, that they've got to redact it? Is it because it supports my version of events rather than their own? Have they redacted it so it buys into the narrative of what the complaint handler says she saw and found? That's not transparent. That's not fair.
Not at all. Not at all. And that's exactly the word I was going to use. We haven't really talked about it that much, but that transparency, it's just not there. And there's such a lack of it. And then also the inconsistency, that we talk about as well. It's really not helpful in terms of people losing the trust in Ofsted, just like you have. There's so many things there that just don't make sense or that are not supportive of educators in any way. And that's why it makes sense that the word judgment is used and why it's an inspection and all these kind of harsh, pressured terminologies. That is exactly what Ofsted are, unfortunately. Like you said, they're not there for improvement, which doesn't make any sense in itself anyway. There's, again, that inconsistency. Surely, like what you mentioned previously as well before we started the recording, we were talking about the materials that Ofsted put out, the content. They obviously want educators to improve. They want educators to understand how to get better judgments, how to, support children better. But if they're saying that they're not about improvement, that doesn't make any sense. And if they're just there to judge, but then not do anything afterwards, how do we... I don't know. Yeah, I think all of this conversation is just leaving me with more questions. So I can only imagine what it's like to be someone like you who's then gone through all this. It's so personal, so emotional. And like you say, it makes perfect sense that there are people out there, and obviously, like we mentioned already, Ruth Perry's case, where she just didn't feel like she could go to anyone. And unfortunately, it ended up like that. And it's just, it doesn't make any sense. Again, it's that lack of consistency where obviously they're focusing on well-being, yet they're not really supporting that in your experience. And then, sitting in that meeting, there's no focus on that individual as a human being. It's all there's systems, it's very harsh, isn't it?
And I think that's that bit, right? And I don't make light of the emotional toll or impact this has had on me. I think because of that, there is no transparency. So there is no space or place, no flexibility in the system to understand it. So like I said, I'm 15 years in now, right? I have actioned every single So you think in 2010, my recommendations were to enable babies to sleep more restfully, because at the time we'd got the cots open in the baby room. So the way the report read was very much, if I did that, then I would be outstanding. So they come in 2015 and we get new recommendations, right? And then they come in 2018 and they make recommendations that we weren't diverse enough. But what seems to happen is it's not a continuous journey. So I think, and even more so in the two most recent. So I know we could argue, well, there's been 6 years or 5 and whatever years between 10, 15, 18 and 24. Okay, I get that. So where where's the system working between 12th of March 2024 and the 28th of August 2024? Because we can argue, can't we? We can justify almost the length of time between them would see children change, adults change, everything changed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all that changed between the 12th of March and the 24th of August was all of my term time only children left. All my school leavers had left. 28th of August in my local authority is the last day of the summer holidays. Mm-hmm. I'm an 85 place setting. I had 20 children there on the day of inspection. I'd personally argue, is that a representative number to give a true feel for what the setting's like? Our recommendation is about continuing the curriculum until children leave for school. It was going in 10
That's
minutes.
interesting.
Apparently, we didn't offer to make the one preschool child that was left a wormery. Although when I offered to show her on our Teams channel on the daily handovers the time a few weeks ago where that same child had built an entire bug hotel and we talked about structure and they didn't want to see it. So again, inconsistencies about and transparency. My team were desperate to show this inspector in August all of the work that they'd done, not only since March, where they felt that they were evidencing the outstanding grade. They also want to show things from before to show that real journey of a child.
Yeah, of course.
Inspector didn't want to look at anything. Yet when I speak to colleagues, other owners, it's been all about what they've been able to show them. I think one of my, what do I need answers for? I think is a good question, right? And I think our parents were not concerned about the quality of educational care being given to the children. My team were showing no signs of being concerned about the leadership and management, the culture, and everything within the setting. My local authority had no concerns about us, okay? So why were we branded that inadequate? Why was this setting, a place that even Ofsted's own report showed was good in 2 areas, judged inadequate? Not requires improvement, inadequate. I think I get to that bit, and this is the bit where I seem to go and drive myself almost insane around what was the point of putting us through this? A setting with no history of negligence or lack of care, one that's loved by its family, trusted by its staff, supported by the local authority and community. Why have we been dragged through a process that's questioned our very identity as professionals? For what end? Like, the frustrating thing for me is between March and August, I was second guessing every action that I did. I was questioning every decision, despite knowing in our hearts that what we do is right because we are reflective. That is written in our current report, that we are really reflective educators. The system that's supposed to uplift you tore us down, right? Everything else that points to quality, to love, to dedication and all those things, what purpose did it serve by giving us that judgment? For an isolate, and I think the frustration for me is I can evidence that was an isolated event. I'm not one of these. I'm not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. And, we are not a dangerous setting that is operating over ratio, that is, hiding things in the closet. We are what we are. So I just think, what was it necessary? What was it for? And for me, the most frustrating thing is nothing changed, yet everything did. And what I mean by that is we got the worst judgment that you can even get. We did nothing different. Nothing changed in how we provide care, the day-to-day love, attention and dedication that I give, or the team give, that we give to the children never wavered. Nothing changed. Yet we got dragged through stress, panic, and upheaval for something that in reality didn't even need to be fixed. We got handed that word inadequate. We got forced to jump through hoops. Yes, we put together an action plan, which kept our funding in place. You'd think in order to go from inadequate to good, that major change would need to be involved.
Because it's a massive step, isn't it? There's judgments in between.
Yeah, but no. Do you know what we did? We changed a single word. What I realised was that maybe, and trust me, this was me literally trying to find something. I thought maybe the risk assessing in the moment that we did is what failed. Okay, so our opening check didn't find a hazard. Our morning venture out into the garden didn't identify this hazard. So what failed was risk assessing in the moment. So after spending a lot of time mulling it over and really digesting and analysing and dissecting this situation, I decided the recommendation I was going to make for the team, because they needed this, they needed something to change so that they could feel that it wasn't all in vain. We changed it from risk assessment to hazard awareness. Because actually what we realised is that when I talk to the team about risk assessing, we want to enable children to take risk, right? I don't ever want children to be in a situation where there are hazards. And to be fair, you're kind of putting that face to say, I don't really see the difference. We didn't really see the difference. You know what? It gave us something. But this is all unnecessary, right? This is me trying to find something in a good system to make better. So we did it, right? Did it create any meaningful change? No. Has it put another layer of paperwork in, arguably unnecessarily? Yes. Has it changed the care or the environment? No. It feels like an insult, Angelica. It feels like we've been pushed to the brink. The team was left questioning their constant ideas, thoughts, motives. I lost one of my members of staff, my Senko, who has been with me for 12 years, said to me, if this is inadequate, I don't want to work in early years.
Oh, no.
There has been huge ramifications. And actually, we lived under this shadow for 24 long weeks. Yet we had to get up every day and smile with those children and be present with those children. And all that had to go to the side. But it doesn't go to the side, does it? Because we know when we don't deal with trauma as adults, that does show up in other places. You know, I can't turn my head that way because the pain in my neck through tension and stress has got so severe that I've got limited movement in my neck, right? These are all the little things, all that we've done, a little bit of extra paperwork, but no real meaningful change. And actually, oh, look, now we're good. Does that not
all of a sudden?
Does that not in itself, though, make a mockery of the system? Does that not highlight the inconsistencies and the flaws in how the system works? And I think the care was never an issue, okay? So like I said, we got 2 areas still good. The system forced us to really conform with box ticking mechanisms, the very thing that Ofsted was very vocal about wanting to move away from. Nothing changed in what we do for the children because what we do has always been good and it's always been right. And when it's not right, we make it right. I think it's Steve Jobs who famously said, I don't need to be right, I want to get it right. And that's a real culture within my organisation. Right? We've got something called our fail first strategy. And that is about us on a quest to become psychologically safe in our setting so that everybody belongs, even in those moments where things go wrong. We know that when we get it wrong, it's okay, that we're going to pick it up, we're going to learn from it. So what is the point of putting a setting through all of this if the solution, in inverted commas, is as trivial as changing a word on a page or adding a bit more paperwork? How is that possibly justifying the emotional and mental toll that it's taken? And it isn't improvement, is it? It's a system, I believe, that thrives on creating chaos, not change. And why are we doing it? You know, I think now is the time for change. I do believe with obviously the removal of single word judgments in the school space immediately does make me question, and I think I actually put this on a post recently and I still can't find the real answer. The new system comes into play in September 2025.
Okay.
What happens between now and then? That's a lot of schools that are due inspections that might be failing, that might not be good enough. What's happening in the interim? I think because I don't want this to sound like a story of woe is me, I'm going to, what would I like to see? Yeah. I want to reform the inspection process and really prioritise context and humanity. Yeah. I want inspectors to be considering those real life examples. When an inspection happens on the last day of the summer holidays with only one preschool child there, that needs to be mentioned at the very least in the inspection framework. That is context, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Today, when we visit, the inspection was carried out on the last day of the summer holiday. The 85 place day setting only had 20 children in, of which 4 were babies and the rest were toddlers, with one child making up the preschool cohort. You know that piece of information now, and I urge you to go and read my inspection report. Because what's fascinating is it talks about not extending the curriculum enough until children leave. One child. I want us to move beyond paper and tick boxing, right? I thought Ofsted had already done this. You know, when we did the reforms to the EYFS and we moved away from assessment for the sake of assessment, I know particularly they were talking about unnecessary assessment of children, but also was not one of the precursors of that unnecessary workload and burden and paperwork on educators?
Definitely, yeah.
Yet the one thing that fixed my inadequate judgment back to good was the introduction of paperwork. Irony, right?
Which you do have enough of anyway, like as you say, you are very reflective setting, you do take data and analyze it, you've got plenty of risk assessments that are recorded, yet there needed to be more somehow.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that, because that was exactly the question I put to the inspector. If you're saying something is missing, tell me what's missing. Well, I can't do that. That's not my role. That's your role as the lead. Okay, that's what I said. I took that on board, right? That's what she told me, and that's the hazard risk thing, right? So then when the second one comes, and now she's finding new things to tell me that we're not outstanding for, I even said to her at the end of the leadership and management meeting, thank you for your feedback. Now, if you give me 1 hour with that inspection framework, please let me show you how and why I believe we're outstanding. I'm going to use your framework, but I would like to show you it through my eyes. And do you know what she said? We don't have time for
that. Of course.
And that comes back to that. Replace one-word judgments, right, with holistic reporting. Single word judgments, especially one as vile as the word inadequate, isn't a fair reflection of all of those complexities, like we've said, nuances, humans, mini humans that go into running an early years setting, right? We are primarily about care, growth and love, not just those tick boxes. So I'd love an evaluation system that recognises all of those, that does highlight the strengths like we already do, but gives constructive feedback, that doesn't destroy morale and doesn't give a one-word judgment. But you also, what I'd love to see is and this is how you do it. Because my issue is, for 14 years, I've aspired to be outstanding, and I truly believe we are. And every time I'm told I'm not. And I'm given ridiculous reasons as to why I'm not. Educators failed to extend in the learning. Well, no, they didn't. They were just being present. They weren't, they were not in, they were waiting to interact rather than just in. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And all she said was, I saw what I saw.
But she saw what she saw as a snapshot on one day, just in a few hours.
And she saw what she saw through her model of the world. Back to my original point, does she understand the difference between interacting and interfering? Does she understand pedagogy? Does she understand she's only been with me 4 weeks and I'd actually rather her say nothing? The educator in question actually said to me, Lucy, the reason I didn't want to say anything is, she said, I was so worried about getting it wrong. So a little bit of context.
That's really sad.
Well, hang on. In March, one of my educators used the phrase doggy Okay. So she said, "Oh, have you got a doggy?" The inspector picked up on it and literally hauled her over the coals for it. So for her, like she said, and she said she kicked herself because it's not a word she uses normally, whether it was just a little bit of the pressure of inspection, not really thinking right. The little girl said it, so she repeated it back. So rather than saying, "Yes, my lovely, that is a dog," she said, "Yes, you have got a doggy." So this new educator was so worried that she might say something like that, that actually she said nothing at all.
I was going to say that's not the end of the world anyway. And I'm a big person that, says language matters, as you do as well. And we should model, correct language. Not that that is incorrect per se, but we need to model the use of, I don't know, more complex words to children and not necessarily kind of baby in the language and things like that. But it's not something that needs to be made a massive deal.
Are you inadequate if you do it once? And I think that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I do, Angelica, have a message for policymakers. Okay. If they're hearing, I really want to urge all of the policymakers to really rethink about how we assess the care of our youngest children. This is where we need to start. The system right now, as we've said, is emotionally and mentally exhausting for providers. And it's not just the inspection and the aftermath. It's the build up too. Okay. Yeah. You don't get any time to breathe because you are never taking positive action towards what you got wrong last time. Yeah. So there's no moving towards a greater goal. I think we've got a rigid, really almost punitive model that doesn't reflect the love, effort, and dedication that we often pour into our work every day. I think if we truly care about the well-being of children, we need to really care about the well-being of those entrusted to look after children. And we've got to move past the fruit basket in the office, right? This is not we've wrote a process in that says we're going to respect the emotional well-being of. I'm sorry, do you know what you should have done, inspectors? When you buzzed my door on the 28th of August and you were greeted by my manager who said, "Oh, good morning. It's so lovely to see you. Our Ofsted nominated individual is actually in hospital with her daughter at the moment. She had major surgery yesterday. She's 175 miles away, and I know she would really value being here because this is her life's work and her business. And obviously, we've been through a real turmoil. What do you suggest?" That inspector should have gone, "Under our inspection framework, we actually, with the approval of our regional director, can pause an inspection for up to 3 days. So because we are genuinely here about well-being and we really want to make sure everybody is well and emotionally looking after themselves, I'm actually going to say we're not going to come in and inspect, and we will return within 3 days. Thank you for your time this morning. Please may I just come in and do a quick welfare check because I am in an inadequate setting. So please can I just come in and just have a welfare check to make sure there are no serious breaches in safeguarding. And that being well, we will do the inspection in 3 days. Within 3 days. That's still going to leave it as unannounced. That then would have been a very different phone call to me as the nominated individual. "Hi, Lucy. Just to let you know, Ofsted have been in. They were going to come and do an unannounced visit, but because you're not here and they really care about the nominated individual's well-being and emotional state, they've got permission from their ID. They're pausing the inspection. They'll return within 3 days. Drive safely. We'll see you when you and your daughter are home." Imagine that. Imagine that. Now, that's not anything that isn't already in the system that we've got.
For sure, yeah.
So I don't understand why that's not being put to use. So that's what I'm saying. Let's just imagine a system that fosters collaboration, encourages improvement, and genuinely cares about all of the people that are in the settings. Like you've rightly said, the humanity of the system here. I think we also need to consider, what does this inspection system actually achieve when you reduce everything down to one word or a tick sheet? And more importantly, who is it serving? What did they gain from doing this to us? And I think for those people that oversee how we're inspected, I'd really like people to think about, we need a system that is compassionate, transparent, and designed for growth. And I genuinely believe the future of early years education depends on a system that does that.
I feel like I should clap. That's brilliant. And I love that you talk about, like, all of those things are so important, of course, but things that people don't normally mention is that collaborative and compassionate aspect. So I think they're really big things in terms of, as you say, changing the culture and not just focusing on the little, not little at all, but kind of pockets of, well-being, judgments, one-word judgments, etc. It needs to be, like you say, collaborative and then compassionate. And if those are the overarching themes, then all the other things that we're seeing problems with can change as well. Yeah. So, yeah.
I think also as well, do you know what I find really fascinating? As settings in early years, we have to deliver British values, right? We have to.
Oh God, don't get me started on British values.
Yeah. But where are they evident within the very own inspectorate system that we currently have? There's no democracy within that. It is
that's a good point.
Down, right? It is literally do as I say and ask no questions. So I just think, we've got to get, what's the word? Succinct, I think, with our messaging. We've got to go right back. This is not a sticky plaster. This is not, like you said, we'll put a blog out about wellbeing, or put a webinar out about, teaching at the point of learning.
Yeah, tokenistic kind of supportive wellbeing. Mm-hmm.
This is at the top, right? We need somebody at the top that genuinely cares, that maybe has worked all the way through the system, or is completely separate from the system so they can give real open view. Because there is that, if you've been ahead of a secondary school, are you the right person to be sat at the top? Because do you know what it's like to work in early years? Do you see what I mean? I get the kind of complexities around policy making and who is right to do the job and but it's got to start from the top. We need a new strategy, right? We need to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and where we're doing it, and when we're doing it. Mm-hmm. The average child in an early years setting will be there for 3 years. You need to inspect at least twice in that 3-year cycle to get a real understanding of what it's like to be that child in the setting. Not once every 6 years that's gone through 2 cohorts of children at the very least. It's bonkers.
Yeah, and Ofsted do talk about what is it like to be a child in this setting. So it needs to be, like you say, what is it like to be a child in this setting throughout those years, rather than what is it like to be a child stepping into this setting for a couple of hours and leaving, like as they do.
One parent they spoke to in August, that's not representative of the families that I have.
No.
Apparently they asked some of the team how they were feeling, but that's not the same as really understanding what it's like to be an educator within the setting. On your really worst days, where do I think there's so many more questions that should be about capturing qualitative data about the humans that work in the system. From parents, I definitely think the local authority need a larger voice in the evaluation of a setting, because actually, to answer my own question, where do I go to as a leader when I am inadequate? Well, my local authority. If you talk to the Department for Education, who are the people that they believe are responsible for looking after us as a sector, the local authority. It's back to locality level. So actually, if that's the case, where's their transparent, and I'm going to use that word purposefully, where's their transparent voice in the evaluation or inspection process? I know there's behind closed doors discussion that goes on regularly between local authority early years advisors and their contact at the department or their contact with an Ofsted, but that's all a bit cloak and daggery, isn't it? And watching. And again, we're subjecting lots of human personal relationships and holding them as like literally absolute, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I think parents need a bigger voice. I think, if I'm an 85 place setting, let's say I'd got 100 children on a roll, I think there needs to be a cutoff that at least 25, if not 30% of the parents need to answer our survey.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use time and technology now to pull in data at all times so that it's not just we're here tomorrow for once in 6 years and then we're gone again.
Mm-hmm.
It's that constant cycle of...
Yeah, they can collect that data over time, can't they? They don't need to be there on all those days as well, actually.
Yeah. I feel like the sun's coming out, like it's shining on me now to say all things are bright. And hats off to my team. They have worked hard,
mm-hmm.
but I would not wish this on anybody. Mm-hmm. And I genuinely thought that getting the re-inspection and getting good would lift the cloud, but it hasn't.
Mm.
I think the emotional toll is going to take some time to recover.
Because it's happened already, hasn't it? It's already happened, and it's done that to you, that pressure to your team. It's not like there's something like that kind of tick list exercise, this judgment, that this one word that can suddenly make all of that go away.
And I think good doesn't do it. Good's not good enough. To sit in my setting and say that my team are passionate, to say all these wonderful things in the report, but then make some contradictory judgments still, it's almost like they couldn't stop. Do you get what I mean? Like they did the absolute worst in March and they've come out again in August. And did I say that 2 inspectors came out on my re-inspection in August? They want me to believe that coincidentally, the inspector that had been allocated my re-inspection was due her own quality assurance visit. So they sent out 2 inspectors, so the inspector and then her team leader.
Mm-hmm.
Who then repeatedly told me throughout the few hours I was with them once I got home, how she was also the team leader. They were a very small team, quote, end quote. And she was also the team leader of the inspector that I'd had back in March.
Interesting.
Number one, really unnecessary fact for me. Keep it as she's due her quality assurance. Don't add in that I'm just letting you know we're a small team and I'm also the team leader for the lady that you had back in March. Okay, well, it's a lovely piece of information. Are you trying to manipulate me here? Are you...
Add more pressure?
What would you like me to do with that piece of information? Because all I hear is this inspection was biased before it even started. It was flawed. Nobody came with a open mind to really see what it was like for a child in August in our setting. You came to still protect the integrity of your system, to still make sure that I knew you had all the power and I was powerless. And I think that's really horrible. Like, that's the bit that weighs heavy, that makes it hard for me to breathe, that I sit here night after night after night mulling over in my mind. You are inadequate, Lucy. You are not good enough. You failed your team. You failed the children. Because remember, it was the leadership and management that we failed on, that was inadequate.
Yeah.
So it was me.
And that's you as the leader.
I started this by saying I will hands up to accountability all the time. So that does sit with me. And I just really want people to, and by people I mean those that have not been exposed to this side of it. Okay. I sat at an event and I pulled a kind of lead inspector aside and said that I was very open to being very involved in the big listen. I'd got a lot to say, and like I said, I've always been such a huge advocate of Ofsted that this is where this hurts, because what I thought they were, they aren't. They are not there to raise standards in education. They are there to protect our system come hell or high water. And if you aren't prepared to identify, acknowledge and improve flaws in your own system, who are you to judge me? I know what I don't do well enough, and I'm quite open to feedback from anybody. I my team are targeted on gathering feedback from parents on a monthly basis. That's how important feedback is to me, right? But all of a sudden, your cruel words mean nothing because you're not following the same standards that you're holding me to. I think that's that bit that I can't get over. I can't move from. I trusted you. I trusted the system. I trusted the people within the system. And you have seriously let me down. But rather than going, whoa, you might be onto something here, Lucy. You might actually be right. Maybe that wasn't right. You've dug your heels in and you've protected the integrity of the system, the cost of my well-being, my business. 95% reduction in new starters this year than we had last year.
Wow, 95.
That's missed opportunities, right? Because yes, we've still had new parents start. And thankfully, we did not lose even one family in that period of from March to obviously school leavers going. So that is testament to my team, right?
Yeah. That shows that they trust you, and they are the people that know the setting and that come in every single day, not just one day for a couple of hours. And that just shows that they trust in the fact that you are a good setting, and that outstanding, that inadequate is not a representative judgment of the setting. Otherwise they would have started leaving. Well, long ago they would have left. Exactly. Not just because of that word.
There'd be at least a complaint, wouldn't there?
Yeah.
If I was desperately inadequate, you'd want to see a journey that the setting was going on.
Yeah.
Or you'd want to see some movement in the leadership and management. You'd want to see some noise that something was failing. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I actually took on more staff in September 2023 than I needed, because to prepare myself for the expansion of the entitlement to 9 months from this September. Because not once did I ever in my plan think that inadequate was even on the cards. When I took my business, from 2018 right the way through to this expansion of the entitlement, I'd only take 30% of my business from funded places because in 2018 I couldn't pay my staff. I misjudged cash flow. The expansion to 30 hours took fee paying parents who paid in advance and made them funded in arrears, not even going down the difference between my hourly rate and the funded rate thing. So a business decision I made in that darkness was that actually to have a sustainable business model, only 30% of my revenue could come from a funded place because the remainder needed to prop up the business. However, with some different attitudes to business modeling and the expansion, I really felt, I really wanted to be supportive of that for my parents, but also because I believe it's not a bad policy. If it helps children have access to some good quality care, some good quality time with their peers where they can play and give parents a bit of support, then why would I not support that? Again, not once did I factor into any of my business planning that come March 2024, I would be in an inadequate setting at risk of losing my funding for all those children. And also now being in a position where I can't market my business because actually what I'm trying to do is just stay a little bit under the radar because I haven't got the emotional energy to go out and justify to everybody new why that's not a fair representation of who we are. And we're now feeling the repercussions of that. If you don't market your business for a year or 6-8 months, there's no surprise we've seen that reduction. If I'm honest, I'm surprised we had some new starters because they've obviously come from referrals, because they haven't come from any marketing efforts that we've done, because we haven't done any. We couldn't do any because I was embarrassed.
Yeah, of course. And, we see all these settings closing, and settings like your own, good settings, not being able to get the children and, fill these spaces that are so desperately needed. And we've got this crisis in early years going on. It just doesn't make any sense. And it just goes back to, what you were saying, just having that 1 day snapshot just doesn't make any sense. And then also, why put you through all of that? Like you said, it doesn't seem, well, it makes sense in the light of, the way Ofsted are operating and everything that we've discussed. It's not a collaborative system. It's not there for improvement. It's there to judge and leave you be. Yeah. And that's the problem.
I think what I want to say is if Ofsted truly want to improve the sector, they really need to start listening. And I don't mean playing lip service by having a hashtag big listen. I mean really listening to the people on the front line. We don't need more bureaucracy. We don't need more layers of red tape. We need empathy, understanding, and a process that recognises the humanity in what we do. Anything less is just lip service. And that's what needs to stop. It's time for change.
Thank you. Very well said. Thank you, Lucy, for sharing this space with me and the listeners. And thank you for sharing your experience and your voice. It's really important that we're talking about doing something, changing, making a change out of this experience, rather than just kind of hiding it or kind of going about it as if, nothing's happened. We're just keeping it within. Actually, it is really brave of you to speak out and not just say, this is my experience, poor me. Of course, it's something, that was a horrible process. It's really unfortunate. No one should be going through this kind of pressure and judgment, but you didn't leave it there. You're saying, and this is what we can learn from it. And that's really fantastic. So thank you.
And thank you for sharing the space with me too. Kind of helping me keep the tears at bay by just giving me those lovely smiles, because it has been tough, but yeah.
Well, I really wanted to just let you have the space to voice this and for people to hear, and you've got a lot to say in terms of, all of these changes that could be happening, that should be happening. And yeah, I think it's important. I was kind of thinking, what you were saying about Judy Fisher interacting or interfering. So I was trying to kind of hold back and not question as well. And I'm kind of just nod and think, I know that I don't need to step in here, because actually she's saying all these things that I'm about to kind of say and question anyway. So I'm just going to let her have her space. And then that's what practitioners need.
And I will not judge you, missed opportunities for extending my learning. I felt you held me in mind. And I think, again, what do we know about that?
Well, all of our listeners and viewers can find Lucy's article on the Voice of Early Childhood website. It's titled The Case for Systemic Change in Ofsted's Approach. And the link is in this episode description. Lucy, the sun's in your face again, like you were saying earlier. The sun's setting. It seems like it's sunrise, but it's actually setting because it's been that long of a conversation.
It started at 9 o'clock this morning.
It's been going on for hours. It actually has been. So there are also, for those who are listening, some previous episodes that actually really link in to what Lucy was talking about. And one of them is Dr. Sue Allingham's critique of Ofsted being the sole arbiter of quality. And that's exactly kind of what she's talking about, very similar to what you were saying. And then Adam Marycz's article discussing the toxic and divisive rhetoric between Ofsted and the DfE and the early years sector, and how we can make a change by working together and being more collaborative and really listening to each other, which again is very much what you were saying, very much needed. So yeah, the links for those are all in the episode description. And yeah, thank you very much again, Lucy. I'm sure we'll hear from you again, and I really hope that we hear something from Ofsted at some point, at least that kind of willingness to listen to the sector more.
Thank you.